And speaking about bills that have been signed, the National Prosecuting Authority has welcomed the signing into law of the National Prosecuting Authority Amendment Act. It is to establish the Investigating Directorate against Corruption as a permanent entity. IDAC, as it is now known, replaces the Investigating Directorate as it was known since it was established in 2019. Let's speak now to Dr. Jean Redpath, Senior Researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Your reaction first to the signing of this particular bill and making the Investigating Directorate more permanent.
Certainly, it's a very positive development to have a permanent structure that will deal with corruption within the National Prosecuting Authority. We do need prosecution-led investigation. It is also very gratifying and important that Parliament dealt with this bill in a very conscientious way. Many of the technical amendments suggested by civil society were actually taken on board. However, it was also an opportunity to make other amendments which would help the NPA in their work against corruption. And unfortunately, the committee did not take that step and just limited itself to the provisions which create the new entity, which will now be permanent.
And for you, which are some of those that were not taken into account, especially when you look at, how possibly the NPA could have, had some of the issues better addressed, for example?
Yeah, so one of the key provisions in the existing legislation that's not in the amendment bill is one which requires the NPA to go through the minister every time they need specialist skills. So this obviously acts as a huge handbrake on using specialist skills in particular investigations. And a very simple amendment could have changed that so that there would be perhaps a roster of specialist skills that could be pre-approved. There could have been many versions to ease the way that the NPA could go about getting specialist skills. And unfortunately, that wasn't done.
And it segues into my next point, because we often hear about how the fight against corruption requires a dedicated, well-resourced unit that can draw from a range of skills, that are specialized in all of that. So in light of this then, the NPA, for example, through a statement saying that, IDAC will now be able to recruit its own skills. Is that going to be just as easy, though, listening to what you've just said?
So it's one thing having in-house skills that you've recruited permanently, but the corruption cases are such that you may need highly specialized skills in a particular topic or issue that you don't have in-house. Securing very specialist people on a permanent basis in-house is exceedingly difficult. Everywhere and in South Africa in particular, where we don't have a lot of those skills. And so making it easier to get those skills from outside the NPA would certainly have assisted the NPA. Obviously, recruiting more skills within will help too, and we welcome that. But there needs to be an easier way on an ad hoc basis, to get in skills when they are needed.
I suppose then it would be maybe a bit of comfort. I was reading what the NPA statement had to say earlier on, and I'm borrowing from it right now. They're saying that, IDAC will also collaborate with the private sector as appropriate, especially in the fields of digital forensics and evidence collection, as well as presentation. That could potentially help.
Certainly, all of that will help, but again, it will need to go through the Section 36 process, which currently is quite cumbersome. Another change that could have been made was to make the NPA more independent of the Department of Justice. It's currently a program within the Department of Justice, so all the funding, all the accounting, all the money goes through the Department of Justice, which makes it a not very independent entity from a financial perspective. And many organizations, civil society organizations who made submissions, called for greater independence, and that there was an opportunity to do that in this bill, but that also was not done.
And I remember even an organization, for example, like Open Secrets, even said that the location of IDAC is also going to be very critical, especially when you look at what they're doing, but also clarify even around them and the Hawks as well. There was quite a lot that was put in place there. But what does it mean then if they're going to be all of these little impediments for the country's fight against corruption? Because the little things have shown us that they sometimes can be bigger headaches, especially when an organization needs to do its work.
Certainly, yes, I would agree with you that the little things, sometimes not so little things, can have a huge impact and role on what is possible. And merely having a unit that is prosecution-led, just that in itself is not going to be enough. The quality of the skills in that unit, the ability of the unit to act without fear, favor, or prejudice, the sufficiency of funding, the sufficiency of the skills that they have, and the ability to call in other skills on an urgent basis, that all would vastly improve our ability to fight corruption.
And did it clarify, because one of the, the words that even civil society was saying, that you also need to look at some keywords in order to be able to clarify what they mean and how everything is to work. Things like, for example, high profile cases. What then do you classify as that? What does it mean? So does it go far enough to be able to clarify some of those?
Yeah, so these are issues that also plague the Scorpions. How does a unit like this select its cases? And there will always be allegations and perceptions around which cases are selected. And this doesn't only apply to IDAC, it also applies to all the cases in the NPA. The NPA is very parsimonious in the cases which it chooses to prosecute, which makes it open to questioning why this case and not the other case. And that is something that will require a wholesale change in approach of the NPA towards prosecuting more often and more regularly and taking more risks.
And talking about that then, there's also another issue that we often hear about when the NPA, for example, appears in Parliament, and that's the issue of the budget. And they will talk about the fact that they're not able to do certain things or recruit certain skills because they also have their own budgetary constraints. That is another huge issue that also needs to be resolved as far as IDAC is concerned, because you look at what the NPA is going through and potentially we may see that happen here as well.
Certainly, again, that's the same point of the Prosecuting Authority being a program of the Department of Justice. So the control over the budget does not sit within the Prosecuting Authority, it sits within the Department of Justice. And so they are reliant on a process that is external to them to determine the budget, to manage the budget, and all of those things. And that can also, on a day-to-day basis, really act as an impediment in the way they do their work.
So when it then comes to, public trust, especially when they see this development, there's now the signing of this amendment bill, and it seeks to give the Investigative Directorate a bit more powers. It's now permanent, and the President even saying in the State of the Nation address that they're looking to make sure that it does its work as much as possible. But what do members of the public then, who are watching us tonight, then read into all of this if there are still some unresolved issues?
Well, look, it certainly is a positive step. We cannot take away from that. It creates certainty. It shows a willingness to go out there and create a unit. And to make it permanent is a very, very important step. And the fact that the Portfolio Committee did very conscientious work, took on board many of the technical amendments of civil society. This also shows that Parliament is doing a better job than it did in recent memory. And so these are all positive things. The other issues that we've talked about tonight are long-term issues that are going to continue to impede the whole prosecuting authority, not just IDAC. It will take a lot more to have change in that regard.
All right, thank you so much for your insights this afternoon. Do appreciate it. And that was Dr. Jean Redpath, Senior Researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute.